Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're playing a Storm Evo Dragon. So this does run a lot of decent automatic Evo effects to get some decent Storm out. Using an Odin actually tends to work in this deck quite well. We're also of course got the Ruler of Skies as a massive win condition, and most things are reasonably low cost. As far as the deck's expenses go though, we are running quite a few legendaries. I mean, you've got 5 just for the 2-drop slot alone, and then the top end is reasonable. I mean, that's 6, so 11 legendaries for this variation, but everything else in the deck is very low cost as far as it goes and does a really nice job complementing each other. So we're going to get right into this and check it out. So this deck did actually surprise me in how reasonably well it could do. It was a fairly solid one overall and really could hold its own where it needed to. It's also a very aggro-ish focused deck where board flooding is your primary goal, while getting damage to the face as much as possible, taking advantage of whatever you can, and sacrificing things when you need to, like the cheap 1-cost gold that you can play out, 1/0 whenever you attack with the Zevo form. Of course you do discard the last card, which sometimes you don't want to do, other times you do. Sometimes it is worth just doing it for the sheer thrill of getting a better card. So throwing Dragoon again, good first turn 1. As soon as you play a spell, which is really handy, can actually be comboed really nicely with other effects, which works out really well. Of course, hitting for 0 because it doesn't do anything at this point. It only gets the discard effect on Evo. And now we just really need a way to take advantage of this. Fortunately, I don't have one yet. Well, we have a spell. It's probably not going to be enough on its own yet. And they did use Wind Blast. Interesting one to spend it on. Makes sense though, going into the next turn. At least I can pretty much set ourselves up for a pretty evenly spread board, all with at least 2 health once we of course use this Evo. Dealing with the early followers that Rune's throwing at us. And setting up pretty nicely for the Omen play, going turn 5 through. Grey, a little bit of a problem card because it does of course get its spell effect, which is quite dangerous, and being a really good Mysteria booster card. At least it's going to be a pretty easy counter. We can just go for 4 damage with an Evo, so why wouldn't we? This deck is of course, as I mentioned, very Evo and damage focused, and when you have reasonably free Evos to begin with, you can usually do pretty well. Light Mage, that's a rough board, but at least they're going to have to trade in a little bit. So with that having just 1 health, we can actually remove everything very effectively. It doesn't really matter where I send Omen of Disdain, it's going to get a good hit. Although I could have guaranteed the complete board wipe without taking this risk. But I wasn't too worried about leaving the 3-2 up, so it really wasn't that big a deal. They allowed me to get some free damage in. Gotta congratulate them on that. Anytime I can get free damage, I'll be very happy. And since we're going into turn 7, we can actually wipe this again and get another 3 damage. Setting up for lethal for next turn. They really did play right into my hand with this one. I've got to say, I'm definitely glad that Omen did get nerfed. That thing was so broken before. In the past, being able to just spam everything was really hard to deal with. You could easily trade, 1 to 5 very easily. And that will be lethal. Ruler of Skies finishing our game for us.
Impressive. Looks like you won.
Next up, we're playing against Forest. Another pretty standard matchup.
Shall we cross swords? Time for me to prove myself.
Doting is okay. I don't mind getting that in the early game. Poseidon is a little more iffy, honestly. That's why it was definitely a good idea to discard it. Getting those low-cost followers definitely do help. Their Goblin is definitely a rough one, though. I don't want to come up against Goblins in the early game against Forest. I'd much rather deal with a fairy or something, just much simpler, especially when they go straight into Mecha Wing as well. So they're definitely getting an insane amount of flood. At least Dragoon is a fairly decent counter. Sylvian Justice though, ruining any decent plan I had. Definitely slows us down substantially. Now all I can really do is put some pressure down for next turn. This is definitely the best way to do that. Fortunately, a second Justice. Justice really hasn't been my friend the last couple of videos. That card really does crush most decks. In the early game, of course. So I went for the double Orcas instead of going for the Warring. I think Warring could have been a little bit better, but I think the setup I can go for with Doting could just be that much better. So I definitely held on to it for that combination if possible. So Queen of the Forest with an Evo. If they had a buff, they would have probably had to have conceded this match at that point, as it would be very hard to recover from a buffed board, but since they didn't, we're still reasonably okay. We do just have to deal with this board now. And at least with Warring and Doting, we can actually do this, even though the Megla Orca is the one that has to be evoed. At least we can remove two things and gain some board. So they're only 4 damage from lethal, but hopefully that 4 damage is not something they can easily get. Korra, not actually the biggest threat to me. We're also running White Frost still, so that definitely has an edge if we want to use it. Turn 7 would have been ideal. We could have removed almost everything for nearly free. At least on the bright side, the couple of decent pings worked in our favour. And Omen of Disdain will just allow us to Evo, kill off the, of course, 1/1, and then kill the 7/1 with its effect. And we don't even have to use an Evo point thanks to the fact that we can just use Disciple to really trigger that. So the curve worked out very nicely, allowed us to keep a full board and deal with everything that Forest could throw at us. It's really just going forward with Storm and having to be careful that's really trouble. And that's a pretty insane ward board, and we now have to deal with that, so this should create for a much more interesting match. So trying to come up with a decent way to do this, I decided that Drake was the best way to at least deal the initial point of damage. And then spread out from there and work my way down. Since we do have an Evo point still, Omen became the best play again. And we get a fire as Drake as well, so the value was definitely there, and our opponent has 1 card left, now only 2 once you include the fairy. So the odds are they just don't have what they're going to need to finish this game off. So this deck does a pretty decent job compared to a lot of decks I've covered that are either out of meta or just really not great decks. This one definitely had some interesting evolved mechanics. Taking advantage of Doting Dragoneer is one of my favourite things to do when you can use Evos, especially when you combo it with Warring Flame, so really fun and enjoyable. If you guys did enjoy this video and want to check this deck out, the link will be in the description below. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Until next time guys, see ya.